Sure, Jake. Thanks very much. So welcome everybody to this is our first of which we hope will be several cannabis sector webinars. My name's John Sinclaire. I'm the managing partner of Baker Tilly in Toronto, but I also am the global leader for the cannabis sector. In case you aren't aware, and this is part of what we wanted to accomplish today, we have a global sector in the cannabis industry, which we're excited about because we see this as a very growing and good opportunity. So I welcome everybody to the seminar. Got a little ahead of ourselves. So in terms of what we hope to accomplish during this 45-minute session, first of all, we want to just at least let you know that there is a sector group here. We're joined by my fellow sector colleagues. But we also wanted to give you a brief overview of the cannabis sector and why we think it's something that we should be very aware of and looking at. We also wanted to talk about it because it's one of those sectors that there is some uncertainty about it. And so we wanted to, give you an understanding of why you should be thinking about getting involved with the sector, as well as what are the opportunities and challenges. As all of the members on the panel today will attest, there's some challenges both in terms of perception, but also in terms of technical abilities. And so we just wanted to, as Baker Tilly colleagues around the world, give you some insight on what those challenges and opportunities might be. As Jake said at the start, just a couple of admin things. Everybody is muted. So if you do have a question, there is at the bottom of your screen a question and answer opportunity. Please log that in. There will be at the end of the panel discussion an opportunity to answer those questions. So we encourage everybody to put your questions in. We also have 3 poll questions. They'll be coming up at various times throughout. Just next to that Q&A button is an opportunity to log in the answer to your poll. These are questions really just we want to get a sense of where everybody is with this whole sector. And then finally, this webinar is being taped and will be on Billy in the future. So if your colleagues couldn't make it, and we understand that that's quite possible, please let them know that it's there and they can watch it at their leisure. On that basis, why don't we get started? So as I said, this is for what we consider is a very exciting industry. In 2018, for instance, it was already a $10 billion industry. That grew by 50% in 2019. Probably what's more significant is where it's expected to go over the next 4 years. There's been various estimates, some as high as 100 billion worldwide, but conservative estimates are that this could be a 47 billion, $50 billion industry. Any way you look at it, there's lots of opportunity, particularly as I think you'll hear from the panelists today. It's an industry that not all firms are getting involved with, so it's an opportunity to make some advancements as a network. Just in terms of where we're at, as I think most people are aware, medical marijuana is now becoming fairly prominent or accepted, but also recreational. Being from Canada, in 2017, we legalized recreational use of cannabis. So we've had medical marijuana for approximately 10 years prior to that. And the lead up to that period was incredible. There was not only is the cannabis business impacted, but the peripheral businesses around the world. And as I said before, and I think you're going to hear when we get to the panel discussion, this isn't just something that's one-off in one country, but it's a growing phenomenon. And so that's where we see this as something that's very significant opportunity for Baker Tilly, given that we can leverage our global network to take advantage of this growth. And finally, the demand outstrips the supply. And so anytime you have that situation, there's opportunities for growth, and something that we want to pay attention to. There's just some examples of where it's been legalized. The U.S. is I think, probably what North America is represented there. Canada, Zimbabwe, Germany, South Africa, but many other countries. Just as I get to the panel discussions, I thought it makes sense to just have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the panel questions. So first, Chris Rux.
Yeah, John, thanks. Yeah, I'm Chris Rux. I am the healthcare and life science industry practice leader for Cherry Beckert, based in Tampa, Florida. And in that regard, our cannabis practice falls under our healthcare and life science practice. So I am also the cannabis leader for the firm.
Great, thanks, Chris. Fabian, do you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. I'm Fabian Duenas from Baker Tilly in Colombia. I'm the legal counsel of the firm, and I've been taking care of these legal issues came out with the legalization of cannabis industry in Colombia, and I've been part of these teams along with the audit teams that have involved with clients that are in the industry. And certainly it's been a real challenge and an exciting opportunity for the firm.
Thank you, Fabian. And Jose Luis?
Yeah, thank you, John. I'm Jose Luis Martín. I'm a partner at Baker Tilly, Spain. I'm originally a corporate lawyer, but I happen to be leading our cannabis practice in Spain, which has been growing crazily in the past few years.
Great. Thanks, Jose Luis. So now bear with me as I launch our first poll. We'd just like to understand where your firm is in terms of considering working in the cannabis industry. And if, as we go through our first few questions, if you could provide us feedback on that, that would be great. And I will update everybody as we get back to the next poll question. Anyway, so now is the important part, the panel discussion. And I just thought I would start off with Chris, as personally somebody that at one point resisted getting into this industry. I know, as I'm sure you are, that there's lots of preconceived notions about the cannabis sector, and a lot of those notions are negative. As a network, why would we want to be associated with this kind of industry?
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, you're right. There are a lot of preconceived notions, which, to your point, are more often negative than positive. Whether that's, there's bad actors in the industry, black market dealings, things of that nature. People have, lived most of their lives, especially here, in the States, where, cannabis was illegal everywhere. It's still federally illegal, but they grew up with the devil's weed, and getting that change of mindset, is a little bit difficult. And I know, at least in the States, a lot of that still negative perception is perpetuated by the federal illegality, of it. That said, what we found in the cannabis sector and dealing with various companies is that most of the companies that are successful and that we would even consider working with are very sophisticated companies. with C-suite executives with great pedigrees and history at other, very large, whether national or international corporations. They're good businesses with good controls and technology and all that that kind of thing, versus what the perception I feel like I hear sometimes is people think these cannabis companies are run by the guy who used to grow pot in his basement and then now he started a company. That's really just not the case, or at least not the case for companies that we're working with, or we as a network would want to work with. But all that said, are there bad players out there? Yes, there are. But the way we've looked at it is that that's no different than any industry. Every industry has bad players and bad actors. It's just a matter of from our standpoint, going through acceptance, understanding who we're dealing with, and making sure we're dealing with the right people. But to your question about why Baker Tilly would want to be associated with this industry, as John, as you mentioned, the industry's not going anywhere. It's only growing. 30 countries now, projected to be 47 billion in market value in 4 years. So we found that as this industry grows, and I'll call it matures, frankly, the companies out there need help from firms like us, from a consulting standpoint, an advisory standpoint, because heretofore, again, at least in the States, there's not been many firms who would dive into that. And as CPAs, advisors, that's really our job, is to help those companies and help them navigate through those complexities, so we can bring a lot of value. And I know that's what we always want to do, is bring value to our clients. And then to John's point, because not a lot of players are in the industry right now, we can really get a good foothold as this industry grows, because like I said, it's not going anywhere. So why we should be involved? Obviously there's opportunity, but at the same time, we should be involved now, because we don't want to be sitting here in 4 years when it's worth $47 billion, still thinking about should we be serving the cannabis space.
Interesting. To kind of further Chris's point about shady characters, Fabian, I mean, you've been in the industry. What's been your experience with the people that you've been working with and their shadiness, let's say?
Yeah. Well, first of all, certainly regulation and controls bring transparency. That's a matter of fact. And if you think of the type of, or the profile of people we have found in our practice, it's clear that it's not only people that it's harvesting on the basement. Okay, why? Because first, the regulation frame brings a series of licenses that in the case of Colombia, it's only allowed for medical and scientific research purposes. That means that you have to apply before the government, in our case, two ministries of health and Ministry of Justice, and make your application in order to get your licenses in different varieties. So first, you have to show who you are, okay, and comply with strong requirements. Also, it means high level of investments. That's another part of this industry, that it's not for everybody, because you need you have to consider lots of money to be invested, especially in the first stages of the business. Then you have to provide detailed information in the application, so it brings to light who's behind the business, but also who's in front of the company. So that means transparency, as mentioned previously. Also, the type of people in front of the business uh, is somebody who is able to convince uh, people in the Toronto Exchange, for instance, because the main source of resources for Colombian industry has been those resources in the Toronto Exchange. So it means you have to be able to convince them that your project is good, that your project is legal, and it means not everybody is capable to do so. Also, that the character in front of the business should be able to manage with GMP and GAP practices. Um, Also, uh, to test positive in strong controls by the agencies for final products. I mean, like FDA in the US, in our case in BIMA, if you are gonna sell some products, you have to prove that your product is good for them, at least, and then the character behind the company should be able to manage all those matters. Okay, um, that's part of the skills that the characters must manage. What have we seen in Colombia? That former traditional companies like rice, flowers, and even infrastructure uh, have focused their attention on the company and moved uh, their experience to this new industry. Um, in At the point that recently the government itself has declared some projects as national strategic interest. Okay, so and the characters behind that should manage all those matters, dealing with the government, dealing with CFOs, dealing with technical issues. It's more than just the guy in the corner that used to sell that now is a businessman. And that's what we found here in Colombia. Former traditional industries now moving their experience to this new one, and even um, the board of directors are composed by that type of people that is able to speak in financial language, legal language. That's what it's behind that characters instead of the shady ones, John.
Right, right. Well, that's good to know. And you know, I don't want to take up too much of the panelists' time, but I can tell you from my experience, the audit committees that I've worked with have been probably one of the most sophisticated audit committees I've worked with. And the other point I would make is, in doing some of my research into this industry, you know, there's universities, substantial universities that are investing in the industry because of the knowledge that they feel that they can build out of the industry, which to me established credibility.
Hey,
So
John,
yep, go ahead, Chris.
can I just add, I just want to add in there to echo what Fabian was saying in terms of the characters that are running the companies that are, you know, the both the front and the back. You know, that's exactly what we've seen, you know, here in the States. I mean, we've got one client that we do some consulting work for that's owned by the Wrigley family, like Wrigley Field, Wrigley Bubblegum, you know, very well established, you know, longstanding business family. And I think the other thing that we're seeing, and this goes both within the States and internationally, is companies are preparing for when the U.S. markets fully open up and they can go to the U.S. exchanges in addition to the Toronto exchanges. And obviously, there's the same level of scrutiny if you try to register with the SEC, there's background checks and all those kind of things. So I think getting back to the perceptions, people perceive there to be kind of shady, but in reality, these companies are, well run, well funded, and, have a thought for the future.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Chris. So Jose Luis, I got to get you in on this. Shifting away from the industry itself and going back to some of the hesitation. I can assure you that everybody in this panel has had some challenges in terms of convincing their firms to get involved with the industry. Jose Luis, can you just give us a sense of the challenges that you faced in terms of talking your partners into it and how you did it?
Yeah, thank you, John. I have to say my experience is quite consistent with what has been discussed so far here. For me, the main challenge I faced when I started working on the sector was, trying to get past certain conceptions or breaking cliches and changing mindsets, right? So, and the first thing when you not only with the cannabis industry, but when you are going to land a client on the firm and you need to involve to a certain extent your partners and colleagues, you have to tell them what the client looks like, and sometimes it's easily understandable and sometimes it's not. And with cannabis clients, this is exactly what happened. It was not easy to make them understand what the type of clients we were facing, as Fabian very accurately explained a few minutes back. So the main thing was for me trying to make them understand that when you think of a client in the industry, at least the type of clients we are working with, you need to stop thinking about your local dealer, and you need to start thinking about guys in white coats, maybe biotechnology, these sort of things. I cannot blame my partners and colleagues, because I have to say that, being very, very honest, I didn't have a particular interest in cannabis before I started working on it professionally, right? Not as a lawyer, not as a user. It was something I wasn't quite familiar with. So I would say that to a certain extent, my mission in the firm was to try to make my partners and colleagues make the journey I had done myself a few years back when I started working in the industry. I quite remember when the first case got in my table, I probably thought of the same things my parents thought when when the word cannabis came up for the first time for them. And again, the kind of imaginary you need to think of is the local dealer, the users, all sorts of shady operations, because no one's to blame, because for a lot of decades, and I'm telling this to you as a lawyer, when you discuss cannabis, it was a criminal law matter. Nobody could change, at least in Spain, it was very clear that the branch of the law in Spain that deals with cannabis is criminal law. So when you were thinking of the kind of activities you wanted to perform involving cannabis, you needed to think, am I committing a criminal offense or am I not? And that is as far as cannabis from a legal standpoint went. It was only when I had this first case on the table that I started to realize that there was more to it. There was a regulatory side of things that had remained, I would say, unexplored for 40 years. And it was not about, the old shady illegal industry converting into a new one, turning into a legal one. It was really a blooming new industry. And again, because you don't need to think about, of course, I think Fabian was very graphic. You need to think about people harvesting in their garages. You need to think about people in white coats trying to find out what's the best compound for one indication or the other. And the moment you start to get deep into actual stuff, so to speak, you then are able to realize how sophisticated an industry this might be. Because again, when you think of cannabis, there is probably the most spread misconception is that the identification of cannabis as a plant with marijuana as a drug, and then you realize there are psychoactive and non-psychoactive compounds, and probably the non-psychoactive compounds industry is very interesting, much more interesting industry than the THC or psychoactive compounds industry. So it is only when you take things seriously that you start realizing that there's more to it than the first, the cliches and the misconceptions that usually pop up in our head, or at least used to pop up in our head when discussing cannabis. So again, this has been my biggest challenge, I would say, trying to make my partners and colleagues turn their traditional mindset to a new, I would say, more sophisticated one. But again, as this was something I had to do myself, it wasn't that hard.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jose Luis. I'm going to add, because to your point, that there's the credibility and the substance of the industry, which we have to get our partners across. But there's also the kind of the moral questions, and I struggle with that. I said earlier that I was against the industry, and I'll share some personal elements of that. My son had difficulty with marijuana. But it wasn't until he told me, it was legalized in Canada, but it wasn't until he told me that, now he can go in and he can buy something at the store. He's 23 and he's perfectly healthy now. But he could buy something and he knew it was low grade, and that it was like buying a light beer, and before, he was subject to buying, whatever he got from his friend, and who knew what that was. And that's when it really struck me that, these perceptions are one thing, but there is a lot of good to it, not just the research that's being done with CBD, but also the regulations. So I just want to pass that along. Anyway.
May I add one thing here, John, if I may,
sure.
just 30 seconds. I think that what you just said is very interesting, and I think it really completes my point in the sense that probably the first thing, if you're not familiar with the industry, the first thing you think of is recreational use, and for instance, none of our clients are into recreational use. They do all sorts of other things. They produce APIs for the pharmaceutical industry. They produce medical grade marijuana or cannabis, and there's certainly not room at this point in time for recreational use in Spain. So I think that's also pretty interesting, that your mind will automatically go to recreational, and there's a lot more to it, I would say.
Yeah, Jose Luis, to echo that and what you said before about, what I've had the same issue in trying to convince, my partners that we need to get into this industry. And, I finally was able to, I think, kind of bring them over the hump when I said, think of it's a pharmaceutical company, white Absolutely. Lab coats, like this is science. To your point, don't think about the recreational, smoking a joint or whatever. It's, you've got a medical issue, and to John's point, there can be low grade, high grade, all these things, and it's very scientific. And, I've toured a number of facilities of cannabis companies in the US, and I've also toured a number of pharmaceutical manufacturing companies in the US that are, subject to FDA approval and all that kind of stuff. I will say those cannabis operations are cleaner and more well run, and technologically advanced than the manufacturers of a lot of the drugs that people take every day for, say, high blood pressure or whatever it may be, So it was that mind shift that you mentioned, that's what really, I think, took it over the edge to where we could start, exploring what we could do and how we could help the industry.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. So I want to get back to our poll. And we've got 73%, we've got voted. Where's your firm now in considering work in the cannabis industry? No way, 0. So I'm glad to see that there isn't that kind of no, absolutely not. 64% of attendees are considering it, which is great. And then 36% haven't yet raised it. And So that's great. That's good news too, because that means there's a potential for raising it in the future, and perhaps we can help. So I'm going to
actually, John, I would say there's an option missing. I would say that there's an option missing there, which is already on it.
Already, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So I just launched the second poll question, and that's what sort of concerns, this is going back to our last discussion, what sort of concerns are raised when the topic of doing work in the cannabis industry is raised at your firm? And hopefully, if we get a sense of that, then we could help, because we've been through it, and we've got our partners through it, and there's no reason why we can't help you. So now I'm going to kind of just basically lob these out to the whole panel, so feel free to just jump in. But just tell me a bit about the opportunities that you're each seeing in the cannabis industry, and whether you think this is a blip that's going to phase out, or whether it's long lasting.
Okay, I'll take it since you guys are being shy.
I would add there.
All right, fair enough. Fabian, you're next. I think, from the opportunities, short term in the US is really, I think, consulting opportunities, in terms of whether it's entity structuring, control maturity, an analysis, help with financial reporting, things of that nature, with the concept of looking towards full national legalization, which is then going to open up the international market considerably. Not that the international market's not already, kind of tangentially playing into the U.S., but it's not at the level that everyone expects it to be. And that leads me to what I think the long-term and opportunities are, and why I don't think this is a short-term phenomenon, is what I see is there's going to be incredible international consolidation, within the industry, to get economies of scale, better products, better quality, all those kind of things. And again, that's where we can, bring value as a network on the front end from a consulting standpoint to make sure people are set up correctly, and almost that sell side due diligence, if you will. But then on the long term, be that advisor, because we've been there from the get-go, to what's the best way to structure, a transaction between Colombia, US, Canada, and Spain that's all going to close at the same exact time. What are the tax implications in the various jurisdictions, and all those kind of things. That's where we can, I think, bring value, because I don't see this changing, in my personal opinion. But if we try to jump into that foray of consulting on a multinational basis, and these companies have no idea who we are before that happens, then we've got no shot. In the long run, I think we're doing ourselves and our partners a disservice by not getting ourselves ready for that.
Fabian, you had a comment.
Yeah, just want to add some figures that we are managing here in Colombia. Definitely, it's a long-term industry. All the research and predictions are set for 10 years time. And just gonna give you some idea in terms of figures of what we are thinking as a country in itself. By 2020, we have 45 hectares cultivated. Those 45 hectares have created 1,200 jobs, okay, and a revenue of $100 million. That's just the beginning. The legalization began back in 2016. Before that existed nothing. But the predictions say that in 5 years, by 2025, we will have 449 hectares cultivated, which may create 12,000 jobs and a revenue between 800 million US dollars and 1 billion US dollars in 5 years time. And by 2030, the predictions are that 1,500 hectares may be cultivated, and the creation of jobs will raise up to 41,000 people working in the industry formally, paying contributions to the social security, paying taxes, and a revenue between 1,500 and 3 billion US dollars by 2030. So definitely those figures makes us being optimistic, and definitely lots of opportunities are there. It's impossible not just catching something from all of that. And as mentioned, it's a strategic sector that the government is boosting now. So that's why we want to be involved in that industry, definitely.
Interesting. Thanks, Fabian. I'd be interested your thoughts on, what we as a network, so Baker Tilly, can offer the industry. What's the value that we can bring? Any thoughts?
I can go if you want, guys.
Absolutely.
Because I have some clear ideas about this. So I think for me, it was great to find out that we had colleagues all around the globe that were already involved in the industry, because at a certain point you weren't sure whether this would be welcome within the network. This would be something that firms around the world would be wanting to pursue. And then it turns out that there's not only the intent to do that, it's an actual thing already. So for me, the best thing we can put on our clients' tables are a specialized team that works coordinately at a global level in a sector that's new, in a sector that simply didn't exist before. So it's not like we are newcomers; we are pioneers, actually. And for me, that has a lot of value. And also, I would say that in my experience, I wouldn't say most, I would say 100% of the clients that operate in the industry in Spain, that are based in Spain, they run international operations, meaning that they have interest in every other country. So it's important that when you have a client in the industry and he asks for help in another country, it's important to be able to refer them to a colleague that knows the drill about the industry and so forth. So for me, that's the best I could say.
Yeah, great. Any other comment? From my perspective, I can tell you that as an audit partner and leading some of these audits, that there is a need for valuation work. There's a need for tax work. There's a need for M&A work, and the list goes on in terms of just the service areas that we need to call upon. And as Jose Luis said, they're not just in the local market. All of these clients that we're dealing with are global and looking around the world. That's the exciting part. From my perspective, the way we interact together, we've had clients that have told us, and Chris, we've got a mutual client that said, our auditor is in Canada, but our operations are in the US, and we've never met the auditor. Well, that's not how Baker Tilly does work. I mean, COVID's changed things, but we have the capacity to have boots on the ground in those areas, so that not only can we meet with them, but we can work with them. So that becomes the opportunity. And I just
if I may add, I'm sorry, sure. Chris, I think.
No.
Can I go? Okay. Now, there's another thing that we really need to bear in mind that most of our clients realize, which is we are still discussing a tricky industry, I would say, from a regulatory perspective, because we have common ground at an international basis. We have the United Nations 1961 Convention, but then again, you need to have local specialists, because the way every country is applying that common ground is very differently. So knowing that you have the adequate specialists within the network. That's also very, it provides a lot of, I would say, a sense of reliability, which is very, very high valued.
Great.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, Jose, and this is to echo John's point as well, is having the connections in the various countries throughout the world within the network to if there is there are services that need to be performed, they need to be performed at a local level. Where we've worked with John's firm on the not just audits but valuation, M&A consulting, various things that just you have to have that expertise within the local jurisdiction in order to do the services, but then work hand in hand and come to almost come to the table to the client as Baker Tilly. We are not, John, when we work together, it's not Baker Tilly Canada and Cherry Becker, it's Baker Tilly. And the client sees us that way, and we work hand in hand. And I think that's really the long-term benefit of getting more of the network comfortable. And one of our goals, that obviously John mentioned, is with this whole webinar series that we have planned, is it's really education to get people comfortable so they can get over some of those perceptions and whatnot, so that we can continue to work together and expand expand with the industry, if you will.
Absolutely. And on that note, and watching the time, I just want to go back to our second poll because it's relevant here. Because when we asked what are the concerns raised about getting into the industry or doing work, the 64% of the respondents. So we've got 77% responded, but say it's lack of knowledge. So I'm excited about that because at the end of the day, each one of us on this panel we're at that same point 2 years ago, and we worked through it, and now we have the experience and the capability. And while there is specialized knowledge, it's not specialized knowledge that we can't deal with, and we are dealing with it. So if it's knowledge and expertise, that's what we've got in the industry right now. So we're prepared, and I think this is the whole point of our industry group. We're prepared to share it because this is a global phenomenon, not just a local. I will then launch. I just want to get to some of the questions, but I'm going to launch our last poll, which really has to do with, we'd like to have more of these sessions. So we're interested in what you'd like to see with respect to the webinars, because we'd like to deliver them. I'll tell you a bit about what our plan is for our next webinar, but in the meantime, why don't you give us your thoughts on this? And Jake, just given the time, are there questions from participants that we should?
Yeah, we had one question that wasn't put in the Q&A, but the question is, as cannabis takes off, are there other industries you think will benefit?
Anyone want to take this?
I would say yeah, absolutely. I would say for us, it's clear that there are synergies with other, very obvious synergies with other industries like life sciences and the pharmaceutical industry. For us, it's very clear. We have been already approached by some big Spanish pharma companies, which just wanted to understand what's going on, and take the time to go through the current situation, and we were asked to help them make some well-informed decisions. So it is very obvious that I would say certain compounds in the plant look very promising with a lot of indications. So I would say that again, life sciences, pharma industry, those are very obvious synergies. Probably then you would also need to discuss, although it's a bit more tricky, at least here in Europe, we will need to discuss food industry and cosmetics industry. But since we are still hoping or waiting actually for big changes in a regulatory sense, then that's another discussion. But for sure, pharma industry, health, life sciences, food industry, and cosmetics, those are industries that are going to be having great synergies with the cannabis one. So yeah, say the answer is positive.
Yeah, and
also,
I would
also
Go ahead, Chris.
courageous
Go ahead.
industries will be benefited from that. I've been talking with chemistry engineers, and they are seeing also a great opportunity for them to develop new products to make it automatization of processes, a lot of engineering processes within the industry, which I think it will be benefited. Also, logistics and supply chain people around that will be highly benefited from the industry.
Yeah, I agree with all those industries, and I know to echo what Jose Luis was saying, in the States currently, no medical research can be done with THC related molecules because it's still the federal illegality. But when that opens up, I think the pharma life science industry is going to take off. The international logistics, heck, even within the States, logistics is really going to benefit because right now the product can't cross state lines. When that changes, that's going to open up I don't know, maybe it's going to be the Amazon of cannabis that flies drones. I'm not sure. But the other thing I think that another industry that I think will benefit again here is the agricultural industry and the whether that's the manufacturing of cultivation equipment or whatnot. I mean, there's been a very long-term change in the agriculture business within the U.S. To where years past, pretty much everything was grown here. Now, a lot of those, farming operations and whatnot have frankly gone out of business, over the last probably 15, 20 years because of competition. I think this could be a revitalization of that industry, which, tangentially leads to more. I mean, it leads to more jobs, to Fabian's point earlier, which means more spending, which means more government taxes, which means improvements, in infrastructure and all that. There so many things that could, come from this. This is really, to me, a game-breaking industry.
Thanks, Chris. I would answer that.
John, we do have one more question here.
Okay, I just wanted to answer that myself because I would say I'm more direct. The industry that I think is going to benefit the most is our industry. Anyway, but go ahead, Jake. What's I did see the question. Did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we have a question related to banking and how banks are dealing with the opening of accounts for cannabis companies. And I think that's probably a good international question, although the banking system is rather intertwined internationally. So there may be some differences locally.
Yeah, let me just tell you the Canadian experience that because it's totally legalized here. There's no issues with bank accounts here. But I do know that it's an issue in the U.S. And so maybe Chris, you might want to just comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it is an issue in the U.S. and at the onset of the cannabis being legalized state by state, Colorado, California, it was, a lot of these companies almost built their own kind of Fort Knox where they stored their own money because none of the banks would take it. Now, as the industry's matured and, I think we're in, Jake, you can correct me where I'm wrong. I believe we're in like 37 states, or maybe I'm at least in some form or fashion, it's now legal. there's a lot more savings and loans institutions that they're not FDIC regulated, that will bank these companies. I know we have a client in Massachusetts that there's a specific, basically Massachusetts-based bank that will take the money in and then has ATMs where it can go back out. But that said, it is a struggle for in the U.S. Because the larger banks, the larger financial institutions are subject to FDIC regulations, and therefore they can't accept money which comes from a federally illegal enterprise. Congress is, there's a number of attempts it seems like every week or two, they try to put something up, fair banking acts to try to open up the banking system, which I think is going to happen sooner rather than later, because there's just been a really big push. And that's going to be really beneficial, I think, when that happens to the industry, because it's going to, again, add a lot more credibility and kind of take away some of those perceptions that we talked about at the beginning. When you have a cannabis company that's working with Bank of America or whomever it may be, large banks, there's an additional credibility there, I think. So
great.
Yeah, clearly it's an issue as well, and it's one of the biggest claims of the companies. Currently, only one bank, a Spanish bank, is open to the business, but all of the rest are not. Just following what Chris said, and certainly it's a hurdle, and if it's managed properly, then the industry would be better for the commitment of creating jobs and stuff. The growth is depends on that. It's what they say, and of course, if soon it's out of the road, then the industry will grow faster.
Great, thanks. Jose Luis, yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting point here, because at least in Spain, banks are very, very conservative, and we also have very heavy anti-money laundering regulations. So, and they are, I would say, very, how would I put this in words, unsophisticated when it comes to their decision-taking process sometimes, and sometimes it is as simple as, realizing the word cannabis is somewhere around the file. They just don't want to know anything about you. And the problem is that, again, is that we are dealing with a much more sophisticated sector than we used to, or that, previous misconceptions might indicate. So this is one of our struggles, and not only with banks. We have faced problems with insurance companies also. And the problem is that, again, you cannot just, we understand that they might be reluctant to a certain extent, but they should be open to, just analyze the thing and try to understand that we are dealing with absolutely legal operations, no trace of doubt here, and that they should be able to provide services to these operators also. So yes, we are having problems with banks, we are having problems with insurance, and I don't think those problems are going to be going away until we have properly updated regulations, which in Spain is not really that, close down the road.
Great, thanks, Jose Luis. The one thing I would say is, and this goes back to an earlier comment about hesitation about getting in the industry, and I think Jose Luis said we're pioneers. Don't look at the fact that there's issues with the bank. You'll get over that. This is just part of perception, but look at it as that's part of being pioneers versus no, that's not a reason why we want to get into it. So on that note, I'm just looking at our time. I do want to wrap up with our poll question. So future sessions, what topics would you like to cover? It's pretty well case studies, 50%, talks with those in the industries, which I will tell you a bit about, and more detailed discussion on the industry. So thank you for that feedback. I think we will take that into consideration. I've got one more side here. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I do want to talk to you about, we have a tentative webinar scheduled for December 2nd. We hope you can join us. In that case, it will be a industry CEO, global client that's is going to we're going to have a fireside chat and talk about the industry. So we welcome you back. Again, remind everybody that this webinar is going to be on Billy, and we encourage everybody to get involved with the industry, reach out to all of the participants, and we're happy to help. So thank you, and have a good day, or night, or morning, wherever you are.
Hey, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John.
Okay, thanks.